feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled Sundance review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Oh, shoot. I was just checking my finances.
I thought something messed up. I hate you. I hate you so much. We've been having some technical difficulties today. We're a little bit behind on our Sundance reviews. We're covering not all of Sundance, but as much as we possibly can this year, which I'm very, very excited about. But Eric got me. You got me. But yeah, today we are reviewing Chloe DeMont's Fair Play. Which is premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, just got picked up by Netflix for $20 million, which is
Talk about a stock
whoo!
price write-up, huh?
But yeah, it does star Phoebe Dynevor, who people would know from Bridgerton, I believe. So that kind of does make sense with that Netflix connection. Also starring Alden Ehrenreich. So welcome to our Sundance reviews. I'm a little all over the place because we recorded some Oscar nomination reactions this morning. We've been screening nonstop Sundance movies all weekend. My brain still hasn't caught up to be in festival mode yet, which is like, because I think it's that weird because we're doing it from home. It doesn't feel like it's like a festival. So I have to like go, oh, I have like 3 or 4 movies I got to watch today. I got to pump out 3 or 4 movies per day. And my brain hasn't caught up with my mouth yet. So I apologize, but I'm excited to kind of talk about Sundance. We're going to try to keep these tight. I know I'm doing the rambling now, but this is our first one. So that's why I wanted to get that out of the way. But we're going to try to keep these 10, 15 minutes, basically those kind of capsule style reviews where we're just going to kind of give our overall initial thoughts on the film. And if you should put it on your radar for when this pops onto Netflix, or if another studio picks a movie up, or when these eventually come out later this year, or maybe even next year. So that's kind of the vibe of these. Eric, how are you?
I'm good, Matt. I feel the same way where it's like your mind and body are two different things where you're thinking to yourself, okay, it's the beginning of the year. We're at the tail end of awards season. We talked about the Oscars on our regular show. There's so much going on. And then on top of that, we're covering Sundance virtually. So, we're watching at least 2 to 4 movies per day and trying to maintain some sort of lucid kind of quality
Yeah.
in how we are absorbing these movies, and sometimes, I don't know how you've been kind of approaching it, but I have been taking more notes than I normally do when it comes to festival
Yeah.
sort of viewing. But I feel that kind of helps because you have something like Fair Play, which, as you just mentioned, got picked up by Netflix for $20 million. So it probably will be coming back into the conversation later in the year. So it's always nice to have a reference for what you saw and revisiting it as well. But it's kind of just good to kind of look at that initial impression and be like, okay, this is what worked and this is what didn't. And these are the things I kind of picked up on while watching it. But I will say this about the film, and we'll get more into it in a second. Of the movies that I've seen so far, and Matt, you might disagree, or because you've seen a few other things, it is one of the more watchable movies. And what I mean by
Yeah.
that is that it keeps you focused on what is going on in this kind of psychological drama. I don't want to use the term erotic thriller because I don't really think it is an erotic thriller.
No.
So with that in mind, it's interesting where it's like some movies are kind of geared towards being more entertainment than they are kind of art house films, and this kind of feels more like an entertainment first and foremost with
Which the
some social commentary.
which the 20 million from Netflix definitely makes sense for that.
Yes.
With all these Sundance reviews, what I think I'm going to do is just give you kind of the synopsis from IMDb. That way you guys can kind of have an idea of what the movie's about, because a lot of these movies, much like Eric and I, you probably didn't know much about them going in. So if you're listening to this, you might have heard a little bit here and there based on some reactions already or some pickups like the Netflix deal. But so Fair Play is an unexpected promotion at a cutthroat hedge fund pushes a young couple's relationship to the brink, threatening to unravel far more than their recent engagement. So it's very, doesn't give you much, but it kind of gives you an idea of what the movie's about. It stars Alden Ehrenreich, Phoebe Dynevor, I got that right. We practiced. Who is in Bridgerton, which that Netflix thing makes sense. Eric, so you already kind of alluded to it. One of the more watchable films that you've seen so far, but what are your first kind of thoughts on Fair Play?
Yeah, so Chloe Dumont's crackling psychological drama, coupled with palpable performances by Phoebe Dynevor and Alden Ehrenreich, unsparingly challenges personal and professional power dynamics, and that kind of is the best stuff of the film. Is kind of that back and forth between the two as they navigate the relationship through this new part of their life, this new chapter in both their professional and personal perspective. And so with that, like, you have a very slick looking production, and I think a lot of people that watch this show Industry on HBO
Yeah.
will have that as a comparison going in, especially how it looks at gender politics as well, and how, this is a very male dominated industry in the finance market, and sort of that kind of Wall Street style of, investing in capital. And I think a lot of it will, including in my own personal experience, will go over your head
Oh,
in
dude, I was
terms
just
of
gonna
the
say that.
jargon.
I've seen
Uh,
so many movies on investment firms and hedge funds, and like you'd think by now I would sort of understand, and I kind of do based on trading stocks and investing into companies and for your clients and making the money and things like that. Like I get the general idea of it, but it still takes me so long each movie when they really kind of start throwing around these terms and how they're getting promoted and how they need to advance their career, where I'm like, this is over my head and looks like a nightmare. So,
and the people
yeah,
that really truly are completely committed to it, like, I think
yeah,
that's the more interesting aspect of, a movie like this. Like I even think of something like, the original Wall Street, or, like a lot of these films that are dealing with kind of, the white collar crime world in a way, even though this
yeah.
isn't necessarily white collar crime. It's just kind of in that similar zone of like Wolf of Wall Street as well, and as mentioned, Industry, where you
We'll do
have,
anything to succeed kind of thing
yeah, and your job and their job is their
is
life. Like
everything. Yeah.
they give themselves over to it completely, to the point where it's like, they live and die by, the work they're doing. And if they have a bad day, financially speaking, or if they invest in the wrong company or pick up the wrong stock, or what have you, again, terminology and jargon that we're both maybe a little bit unfamiliar with, and, they lose money or they lose capital, it can be the end of their career. You only have one shot at the top, and that's kind of where that cutthroat quality kind of comes in, where it's like you're constantly having to prove yourself, not just kind of coast on past successes, that you're only as good as your last deal. And
Yeah.
you see that in a very interesting way, because I feel like the way the production design and the blocking of these scenes, the way that we see, the head offices behind glass, or the way that meeting rooms are set up, where the people that are kind of the higher ups are sitting at the main table, and then you have analysts sitting on the sidelines, kind of just being spectators.
Like in
A
the
lot of
meetings
that
and
is,
stuff. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of that I think is the most interesting, in terms of just like how the power hierarchy works within, this field. And it
Yeah.
does feel in a way that it's not been touched by, human resources, or looking at it from the point of view of bettering a working environment for everybody. It is still very much male driven,
And
and
how that
it's
kind of
a
applies to other relationships as well. And I think that's kind of,
absolutely.
how the movie plays out. I mean, I read you guys a brief description of the movie, but Aaron Reich and Dinever's characters are in a relationship. They both work at the same hedge fund. They're both analysts. And at one point in the movie, Phoebe Dinever's character gets a promotion over her fiance, and he ends up reporting into her at this hedge fund. So, and then how that power dynamic shifts and how gender roles and all this stuff comes into play. And to Eric's point, like, I think it consistently kept me engaged throughout the thing. Like, my mind was never drifting. I never wanted to look at my phone. I was never bored. Like, I was always interested in what was happening. But ultimately, as it kind of all came together, I always wanted it to go a little bit further, or wanted them to, play around with that a little bit more. And maybe that's my own I didn't really have any expectations for any of these Sundance movies because I didn't know much about them going in. But as I'm watching it out, and it's sort of pitched as an erotic thriller, but it's not really that. It's and in that case is like I kind of wanted more of a cat and mouse game between this couple that are both kind of vying for the same position at the same company, and one person gets it and one not, and how you kind of, your relationship shifts, and you want to try to outdo the other person due to jealousy or anything. And like it's very straightforward, I found, like as it plays out with like one person's, self destruction. And as that kind of plays out throughout the movie, I became kind of less and less interested, and it gets more and more dramatic, and kind of heightened and ridiculous near that last act. But I think it was just missing like a back and forth, because like I think the movie plays with those gender roles and the power dynamics in that quote unquote erotic way that they're kind of pitching it a little bit, in like how they talk to each other during sex or in their home life and things like that. And you can kind of see how that's affecting both of them. But as it got on, it got more and more absurd of how one of them is acting, and how it kind of all plays out by the end, that I think it ultimately kind of falls apart in the last act. And I think my enjoyment of it overall suffered. Like I think while watching it, I'm like, oh, you know what, this is, I kind of like that, what you said, like at these kind of hedge funds and things like that, and always having to get the big score, find the right thing to invest in, and everyone competing against one another. It's so high stakes, and how that applies to a relationship is kind of interesting. But ultimately, by that third act, I was just kind of like, I don't know if I like where this is going. And then where it goes, I'm like, really, that's it, eh? And it's nothing, like I like at times Aaron Reich and Diniver, but then at times I go, do I like them, or do I not think that they're great actors? Like there are scenes where I go, oh, this is really good. Like I see the emotion, I see them kind of acting their asses off. And then sometimes it goes into that place where I'm like, oh, I know you guys are trying really hard, and it's kind of being overacted, and it becomes a little bit, more and more ridiculous, which you can take in that if you really wanted to play this as a straight erotic thriller, like some of that over the top nature is part of that genre, right? Like that sleaziness, the kind of extraness of the gaudiness of that kind of genre can kind of apply. But this movie plays it fairly straight, and then kind of goes off the rails, I feel like, in that last act. So it ultimately kind of hindered my enjoyment. And I think it's a watchable movie. It makes sense for Netflix, I think. But ultimately it just didn't really vibe with it by the end of it.
Yeah, I really like two-thirds of this movie quite a bit, and I think that like Damont's direction is completely controlled and calculated
Yeah.
in that setup of this relationship that's kind of, again, under the radar because they have a policy at work that they don't want people dating, and so they're kind of juggling that sort of secrecy on top of also kind of trying to both one up each other. But there's also something about it where it's like there could have been a little bit more of these two characters, Emily and Luke, kind of trying to one up each other and try
Yeah.
to figure out, like, who has the upper hand in scene to scene, and kind of keep it in a teetering kind of way where you're never sure who is going to be,
Who's in
the,
control, really,
yeah,
right? Like,
of the victor. And I think that that's the thing that kind of keeps suspense going. There are moments though where, again, like I think like having Eddie Marsan as sort of the boss of this financial firm, like the way that he is portrayed, I think is kind of this very icy cold and cool kind of character who comes in and changes the dynamic of the power structure from time to time. And again, he's focused mostly on money and on finances and on the monetary value of what the company is doing than anything else. And there's some commentary about whether sexism is involved, and diversity hiring and things like that, and all of that is important to talk about. And I feel, again, like
and is interesting,
hbo's
but
hbo's industry does a lot of that. And so in a way it is kind of derivative, even though there are moments that I think between the two leads work really well. Aaron Reich's an interesting actor because there was a moment there where he was becoming kind of a, potential movie star. I think a lot of people really liked him in Hail
Hail
Caesar,
Caesar,
and
and then
his in
obviously
the
Solo, but
yeah, and Solo was the film that basically, detoured his career a little bit because not necessarily his performance, it's just the film kind of tanked and it didn't do well for any of the leads for the most part. Um, but you look at him, he's an interesting guy because he has this quality where in any scene he either acts or looks like Leonardo DiCaprio, Jack Nicholson, Joshua Jackson, and a little bit of Matt Damon, and it kind of feels like he's morphing into one of those actors in any one scene. So there's a weird inconsistency in terms of that, and that's nothing against his performance per se. That's more so me projecting onto him. But there is that quality where it's like I think like the best version of him is the Jack Nicholson version of him because this
sure.
feels like something that if it was made in the 70s or 80s, maybe Jack Nicholson would have been the star of this kind of movie. With Phoebe Dynevor, I felt that her performance in this movie was the strongest of the two just because I feel the arc is more fleshed out and has
Yeah.
sort of a trajectory where it's kind of
That's more nuance
growing.
to it too.
Yeah, like I really like the way that, there's one sequence, and I don't want to give too much away, but it's not really a spoiler. There's a moment where something happens that she's able to rebound with the company. And it's her walking literally from one side of the room to
Yeah.
her office. And the way that she walks in a very confident manner, amongst a sea of men, it's just like little moments like that that I feel really work quite well. Or even like when she's watching a British trial, the results, and then you see in the background Aaron Reich's character making coffee and he's grinding the beans, and then she tells him to stop because she can't hear it. Like those little things I really kind of like picked up on. And then there are other moments that I found weirdly distracting. And again, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but like the Aaron Wright character, he basically goes on to this kind of like self-help guru kind of like
Yeah.
Tony Robinson thing, and the actor who's playing him in the one kind of video is Patrick Fleischer from Mulholland Drive and Twin Peaks
Yeah.
The Return. And
And
I
that
kept
mall we
thinking,
were at in LA.
yeah, and Under the Silver Lake, and I kept thinking to myself, oh, is this character going to like come
Play a
back in
bigger
any
role
way?
or
And he
something. Yeah.
doesn't. But that's just again maybe a character actor thing where it's like, I'll come and record
I
this
get
YouTube
what
video
they're
for 5 seconds.
I get you have to it's a little bit of a reach, like you have to put it together yourself of how he's acting is based on everything he's reading in this book and these teachings and stuff like that. But like
But
I
why
don't
he's
know.
doing
Like
it as well, because he
yeah.
feels emasculated. He feels
Yes,
like
yeah.
he was entitled to a position that he wasn't able to you know obtain in the way that he wanted to. And again, like it's interesting from the point of view of sexism and gender identity and
Yeah.
politics, and even just like the idea of who's the breadwinner of a family. um and those things I think are all really good. And again,
I
the Dynevor
agree.
thing that I really liked as well, that I think is maybe a very subtle thing, is anytime she has calls with her mother. Her mother's from Long Island. She has a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
kind of like stereotypical accent, but Dynaver's character Emily, the way that she talks, like you can tell that the character probably over time had trained herself not to
Not to
behave like
use it.
somebody
Yeah.
from Long Island, in the way that like I remember Stephen Colbert talked about how like he repressed his southern uh dialect
When he
because he
got
felt that,
into yeah.
yeah, because he felt people would think that
Well,
he's
even
not
when she says
smart
she's
or
from Long Island, someone makes a comment about it, of how long she has to travel into work and stuff like that too, right? But
yeah. And
um
those little things I think really do help in kind of adding a little bit more. But it's just those last 15 minutes where it kind of feels like
yeah,
it needed
15,
almost
20.
another half
Yeah,
an
I don't
hour
know.
to kind of really conclude that in a way that was more, I don't
I
even
agree.
say
It's almost
satisfying.
2 hours, but, like, it's there's something about the leaps in logic or certain things in that last act that I just and I get things escalate, and especially things can be tense in a relationship, and when you add in, a career and work on top of that, it's almost, too much. Um, and I just feel like there's some things in that last act that I think undercut some of those good things that you're talking about, where I'm like, there could have been a more interesting way to do this, and that cat and mouse game of trying to one up each other and someone winning or no one winning kind of thing. That I just feel like there's so many huge leaps where at those last moments I'm kind of not laughing at what's happening, but I go, how did it escalate this far? And those are some of the erotic thriller elements, but like, obviously erotic's the wrong word for certain things, but like, they try to have that kind of like, dark
Sexual
stuff that,
dominance, I think,
yeah, yeah,
is a better way of phrasing it, where like there
yeah,
is a kind of sense of sexual prowess and power
yeah,
over the other person, and using that to your advantage,
in your
even
relationship or your career and
or
things like
even
that too.
stereotyping, other
Yeah, yeah,
people, where,
totally.
like, again, like,
Yeah.
the conversation of why the Emily character got the position, not because,
Yeah.
she is intelligent. She has, a piece written in the Wall Street Journal when she was 17, and like she's more analytical than
But they'll still
anybody
think
else in
that
the
she slept with their
office.
boss, right? Because that's
Yeah.
just how shitty men are in places like this. So yeah, I think there was a decent movie. Like I was mildly enjoying myself for the majority of it, and then I think it kind of crumbles at the end there. So, not the worst thing in the world. I mean, when it pops up on Netflix, I'm like, if you're interested in it or you like Aaron Reich or Diniver, then like give it a shot. But um I would have liked them to take another stab at that last act, because I just don't think it quite works. So I'm mixed negative, so I'm gonna give it a 2.5 out of 5.
And I'm mixed positive. I think that this is two-thirds of a really strong film, and if it had, stuck the landing, it would have been probably a 4, 4.5, because there are so many things that
Wow.
are working, but then it kind of gets to that point where some of the unresolved issues that are brought up in a kind of tangential way in the first sort of act, and even like kind of full circle quality of the storytelling, where you can kind of see the seams in those last, few sequences, does kind of ruin the movie, in not a way that it's not completely, just kind of push it
Unwatchable
to the
or
side.
worth.
But yeah, but
Yeah.
it kind of feels like there's a greater film here, and there's a better movie here. But for what it is, I think it's very much an entertaining, suspenseful thriller that works on the performances and the writing, and with the kind of slick look that it has. And again, I don't think calling it an erotic thriller is the way to go. I think this is
They're gonna
definitely,
market it that way.
it's a
Absolutely they will.
psychological drama. I mean, like,
Yeah, I
this
know.
is inside baseball,
But
but we
there's a
had to
lot
log
of
in an
like
18 plus
sure. Because
Sundance
there
thing.
are,
So it,
yeah, there are some explicit things that happen. More trigger warnings I think are a good thing. Um
yes.
but I do think like they will play up the sexy language and the sex scenes between the couple, because it's still very much like this. It's going to be marketed as that sexy cat and mouse game, even though it's not necessarily that. So I could be wrong, but it's Netflix, so I'm assuming that's how they'll market it. So
Yeah,
we'll
so I'll
see.
give it a 3 out of 5, and I quickly wanted to prompt you on this because you mentioned it before we started recording.
Oh,
You
Swole
mentioned
Burnham.
something. Yes, Swole Burnham.
Which is Rich Summer. If go look up Rich Summer, you'll know him when you see him. He's always kind of in small character roles and stuff like that. He popped up in
He's
what
in Mad
recently?
Men, and
Mad Men, but King Richard recently, and more. But you'll see him pop up in everything. But I said he looks like Bo Burnham if he was swole. So he was part of Glow. He was a main cast member there. But yeah, he looks like Swole Burnham. They could play brothers, Eric was saying, which I totally agree with. All right, our 15-minute review is now 24. We're gonna try to keep these down, but appreciate you guys listening or watching. We'll be covering a bunch of films from Sundance. So keep it locked right here on Untitled Movie Reviews. We'll have reviews for Eileen, Theater Camp, Infinity Pool, Magazine Dream, Sometimes I Think About Dying, Run Rabbit Run, The Pod Generation, and more. Right here on Untitled Movie Reviews, one-stop shop for everything. Just head over to Letterboxd, which is Untitled_movies. Drop us a review on your podcast service of choice if you would be so kind, or thumbs up on YouTube. We really appreciate that. And then go check out our new podcast, The Cast of Us, which is a HBO The Last of Us podcast on all podcast services and on YouTube and everywhere you can find Untitled Movie podcasts. And our newest episode of the Untitled Movie Podcast is also up, which is our Oscars. I mentioned it. We did our Oscars nominations reaction kind of to all the nominees. So go check that out. Is the Untitled Movie Podcast 143. Same spots as those other ones. As always, my name is Matt Rohrbeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly at untitledmoviepodcast.com. And you can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Eric Marchin. You can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
Fair play, Swole Burnham. Fair play.